Listen closely for a second. Not to the room. Not to the city outside your window. Not even to your own breathing. Listen for that thin, persistent tone so many people describe. The ringing that never fully goes away. For years it's been dismissed as stress, hearing damage, screens, age, bad posture, too much caffeine. Doctors call it tinnitus and move on. But in the underground, the people who keep binders of redacted documents and map out coincidences like constellations, there's another story. A story that says the ringing isn't a symptom. It's a signal. And if you have it constantly, if it's not occasional, not after loud noise, not something that comes and goes, then in this narrative you weren't cursed. You were selected. Not by a benevolent universe. Not by some gentle guardian angel. But by an emergency system older than governments, older than nations, older than the idea of humanity as a unified thing. An alarm system built into flesh. Because something is coming. And the first warning isn't a siren in the sky. It's a tone in your skull. This is the timeline of the ring bearers. The people with constant ringing ears, the chosen vessels tasked with warning the rest of us about an approaching invasion, and the hidden war already happening around that signal. Before 10,000 years ago, long before recorded history, the story begins with the oldest conspiracy of all. That humans are not alone, and never were. Not in the spaceships on TV sense. In the sense that we may have been engineered, guided, seeded, or at least monitored. Ancient myths talk about voices, trumpets, divine hums, whispers from the sky. In this version of events, those aren't metaphors. They're early descriptions of resonance phenomena, audible effects caused when something interacts with the nervous system. Some traditions describe a sacred inner sound, a hum you can hear in deep meditation. Others describe it as a warning tone heard before disaster. These accounts get written off as spiritual poetry, but in the ring-bearer narrative, they're field notes from the ancient world. Humans noticing that certain people could hear what others couldn't, and those people often predicted raids, plagues, or sudden collapses. Around 3,000 years ago, mystery schools and early priesthoods begin codifying it. Not the invasion itself, just the fact that certain humans respond to the sky signal. They develop rituals to amplify it. Fasting, sensory deprivation, chanting, harmonic instruments. The goal isn't religion, it's calibration. If you can reliably produce the tone, you can train someone to interpret it. In the darkest version of this myth, kings keep these listeners close the way modern leaders keep intelligence agencies close. Because hearing the signal means you get a head start when something bad is about to happen. Around 500 years ago, the story shifts. As empires spread and centralized power grows, the ring-bearers become inconvenient. People who can sense a threat don't fit neatly into controlled narratives. They get labeled witches, heretics, unstable, possessed. The old methods of training listeners go underground. Groups form with one primary mission: preserve the knowledge of the tone and what it means. By the late 1800s, electricity becomes the new priesthood. Telegraph lines span continents, early radio experiments begin, and suddenly humans are filling the air with signals. Here the conspiracy thread ties into something many people already suspect. Once we started broadcasting, we became visible. Not just trackable, but audible, like lighting a flare in a dark forest. In the ring-bearer timeline, this is when the first modern wave of constant ear-ringing begins. Not because of machines damaging hearing, but because the environment becomes saturated with artificial frequencies, and certain nervous systems react like tuning forks. These people can't unhear it. The tone locks in. Around 1901 to 1918, radio becomes widespread and war becomes industrial. The narrative claims the first intelligence programs quietly notice a pattern. Certain operators, certain signalmen, certain individuals working near communications equipment report persistent tones, strange dreams, and a heightened sense of impending events. In other words, early versions of the ring-bearers end up in the exact places governments are already watching. In the 1930s and 1940s, as the world descends into larger conflict, the story adds a shadow layer: secret research into resonance, perception, and human receivers. The public sees radar and encryption. The hidden programs, according to the conspiracy version, chase a different goal: how to turn the human body into a sensor. By 1947, the timeline hits a familiar landmark: the modern UFO era. Roswell becomes the symbol, but in this narrative, it's only the public ripple from a deeper event. The story claims a crash or retrieval isn't just about hardware. It's about understanding a technology that doesn't communicate through sound in air, but through direct interaction with the nervous system, through frequency and field effects. This is where the ringing becomes central. In the ring-bearer mythos, the invasion doesn't begin with ships over cities. It begins with compatibility testing. If you can influence perception through directed fields, you can soften a population without firing a shot. You can induce compliance, confusion, or obsession. You can make people argue about everything except the real threat. From 1953 to the 1970s, the timeline connects to the popular constellation of mind control conspiracies: MKUltra, sensory deprivation, psychoactive testing, remote influence, behavioral engineering. The official record admits pieces of unethical experimentation. The underground narrative claims those were crude steps toward a larger discovery. The ringing is not random. It's a byproduct of contact. Not contact as in a conversation. Contact as in proximity. Like a submarine you can't see, so you watch for the pressure change in the water. The ring bearers, in this story, are humans whose auditory pathways and nervous systems react to a hidden presence, entities or craft operating in a band of frequency most humans ignore. The ringing is what happens when your biology notices something passing through the edges of your reality. In the late 1960s, as space programs accelerate, the conspiracy timeline claims something else happens. The listening net moves from the ground to orbit. Satellites don't just watch Earth. They transmit. They create a grid. The ring bearers begin reporting a new pattern. Spikes in ringing intensity correlate with certain launches, certain tests, certain nights when the sky feels wrong. Through the 1970s and 1980s, rumors of black projects explode: underground bases, off-book aerospace programs, and experimental communication systems. This is where the narrative borrows from the popular idea of a secret space program without needing to prove it. It simply claims that whatever is happening, governments realize the invasion will be won or lost through information control, not battlefield control. So they do two things at once. They try to replicate the signal, and they try to silence the people who can naturally hear it. From 1987 to 1999, the story introduces the first coordinated suppression campaign. Not a single memo that says, "Silence tinnitus people," but a cultural drift that makes the phenomenon seem purely medical, purely personal, purely meaningless. The more ring bearers report strange correlations, ringing spikes before major events, shared dreams, the feeling of a pressure in the sky, the more institutions respond with the same script: stress, anxiety, coincidence. In this narrative, that's not negligence. That's strategy. Because if the ringing is an alarm, you don't want the public treating it like an alarm. You want it treated like a nuisance. By 2001, the timeline claims the signal changes again. The world becomes hyper-networked, hyper-monitored, and saturated with wireless technology. Here, the narrative merges with modern conspiracies around 5G, smart devices, and frequency exposure, but with a twist. It's not that the networks cause the ringing. It's that they mask it. They create a constant fog of noise so that the real tone is harder to distinguish. Ring bearers describe it like trying to hear footsteps during a concert. From 2003 to 2012, the story claims a quiet war unfolds between two groups. One group believes the ringing is a warning from something protective. Call it the Earth's immune system, call it a guardian intelligence, call it the human upgrade. They argue ring bearers are being awakened so we can resist manipulation. The other group believes the ringing is not a warning but a tagging mechanism. A way for the invaders to locate compatible humans, map populations, and identify which nervous systems can be overridden. In this timeline, both groups are half right, because the same signal can be used for two purposes. A distress beacon can also reveal your position. By 2013, the narrative brings in another familiar element: large-scale atmospheric and ionospheric experimentation lore, harp-like myths, weather manipulation rumors, sky sound reports, unexplained booms, strange auroras, and global resonance anomalies. In the ring-bearer story, these are not separate conspiracies. They are pieces of the same machine, a planetary-scale tuning attempt. Not to tune the weather, to tune us. And this is when a key detail emerges. The ringing is not always one tone. Ring-bearers start describing layered tones, pulsations, sweeps, and moments where the tone becomes almost structured, like a code. A few claim they can feel meaning in it. Not words, but urgency, direction, timing. From 2016 to 2020, the timeline emphasizes social fracture. The conspiracy narrative argues that the approaching invasion requires a divided population. Not divided by one issue, but divided by everything. Truth itself becomes negotiable, reality becomes tribal, and attention becomes the main battleground. In this version, the invaders don't need to conquer militaries first. They need to conquer consensus. Ring-bearers during this period report a disturbing trend. The more chaotic the world gets, the louder the ringing becomes. Some describe waking up at the same hour every night, hearts racing, tones screaming, as if something passes overhead like an invisible storm front. Then the timeline moves into the near-present. 2021. Reports of ringing and pressure sensations surge in online communities. People who never cared about conspiracies start asking the same question. Why do so many of us hear the same thing? In the ring-bearer narrative, this is the year the signal becomes widespread enough that it can't be fully buried. It leaks into the mainstream as a common complaint, but underground it's treated as Phase 1, the awakening of the receivers. 2022. The dream wave intensifies in the story. Ring-bearers report recurring symbols. A red horizon, a second moon, a silent fleet behind clouds, a feeling of being watched from above water. This is where the narrative borrows from USO lore, unidentified objects emerging from oceans. The claim is that the invasion force isn't coming from deep space like a movie. It's already here, concealed in places humans don't fully control. Deep ocean trenches, polar regions, subterranean zones, and possibly orbital blind spots. 2023. A split occurs among ring-bearers. Some become interpreters, attempting to map tones to events. Others become shields, developing practices to reduce influence. Grounding, sensory discipline, meditation, fasting from screens, even old-school ritual techniques. In the narrative, these aren't spiritual hobbies. They're countermeasures. The interpreters claim the tone contains timing. The shields claim the tone contains intrusion. Both agree on one thing. Something is ramping up. 2024. The story claims the first open probes begin. Not a full invasion tests. Localized incidents. Brief displays. Drones, orbs. Lights that move wrong. Objects that appear to respond to attention. In this narrative, public drone stories and UFO chatter are not random. They are normalization. The point is to get humanity used to the idea of unexplained objects so that when the real event arrives, the emotional shock is reduced. The ring-bearers, however, experience something else in 2024. Synchronization. People across different regions report sudden spikes at the same time, followed by a heavy silence. In the lore, this is the signal being handshaked with the human network, like a modem tone except biological. 2025. The tone changes character. It becomes less like a whistle and more like a pressure wave. Ring-bearers describe it as the feeling of standing near a massive engine you can't see. In the conspiracy timeline, this is the year the invaders finalize the overlay, a frequency layer meant to sit on top of human perception. The objective isn't mind-reading. It's mind-shaping. Subtle influence over emotion, impulse, attention, and fear. This is also the year the narrative introduces the false dawn operation, closely related to the popular Project Blue Beam concept. The idea isn't that governments will fake an invasion from scratch, but that they will exploit a real approaching event to steer public reaction. When the sky becomes undeniable, The story claims institutions will present a pre-packaged explanation, a pre-selected enemy, and a pre-approved salvation, so the public runs toward control instead of toward unity. Now the timeline moves forward. 2026. The Ring Bearer Network goes semi-public. More whistleblowers, more anonymous documents, more, "I don't care if you believe me, I just need you to hear this." The key claim is that constant ringing isn't just a warning, it's a recruitment. The invasion has stages, and the first stage is identifying the humans who can detect it early. Those humans will either become leaders of resistance or targets for neutralization. In this year, the narrative says a new medical trend emerges, treatments that reduce perception sensitivity. They'll be marketed as relief, as quality of life improvement. But in the conspiracy story, they serve a second function. They blunt the very sense that could keep you alive. 2027. The quiet nights begin. In the lore, there are nights when the ringing abruptly stops for large clusters of ring bearers, replaced by a thick pressure and a sense of being watched. These nights correlate with strange satellite activity, unusual military flight patterns, and increased ocean surveillance. The claim is that something large is moving into position and the signal temporarily switches from broadcast to listen mode. 2028. The first mass sky event happens in the story, something visible enough to trend globally, but ambiguous enough to argue about. A line of lights, a hovering shape, an atmospheric distortion. The narrative insists the ambiguity is deliberate. The invaders are studying human response. How quickly do we unify? How quickly do we riot? How quickly do we accept an official story? How quickly do we turn on each other? Ring bearers report that the tone becomes almost unbearable during the event, then shifts into a lower hum afterward, as if the environment itself has been retuned. 2029. The human countersignal is deployed. In this narrative, a coalition inside various institutions. Military, private aerospace, intelligence, and maybe non-state groups attempts to jam or distort the invader frequency overlay. This is the year the world experiences bizarre glitches. Communication disruptions, strange auroras, increased seismic hum reports, mass insomnia waves. The point in the story isn't destruction, it's interference. A frequency war that looks like random global weirdness to the public. Ring bearers become collateral damage. Some feel relief, others feel attacked. Many report that the ringing now comes with emotional surges, sudden dread, sudden anger, sudden despair, suggesting the overlay is trying to hook into mood regulation. 2030. The year the narrative calls the threshold. The invasion is no longer hypothetical in the underground. It's operational, but it still doesn't look like Hollywood. It looks like systems failing at the wrong time, leaders behaving strangely, populations exhausted and reactive, and a rise in impossible sightings near strategic infrastructure. In this year, ring bearers begin reporting something chilling. The tone sometimes carries images, not hallucinations, but sudden downloads of place and movement. A coastline, cold mountain, a black triangle over water, a sensation of counting down. They interpret it as the warning finally becoming explicit. 2031. The vessel directive emerges in the lore. The idea is that ring bearers aren't just receivers. They can become transmitters. Their nervous systems can broadcast coherence, calm, focus, unity, like a living antidote to the overlay. Communities form around this practice. Group meditations, synchronized breathing, offline gatherings. To outsiders, it looks like wellness culture. In the conspiracy story, it's training for a psychic immune response. 2032. The first unmasking. Something appears in daylight long enough to remove plausible deniability. Governments respond instantly with narratives, footage control, and emergency framing. The public fractures into camps. But the ring bearers respond differently. Many describe the tone suddenly harmonizing, as if the alarm finally found its purpose. In the lore, this is the moment the warning system shifts from detection to guidance. 2033. The ocean doors open in the narrative. Increased reports of objects entering and leaving the sea become too frequent to dismiss. The idea spreads that the staging ground was never outer space. It was here. The invasion force hid beneath our assumptions. Ring bearers now report a second tone layered beneath the first, like a bass note under a whistle. They call it the depth hum. In the story, the depth hum is the signature of submerged platforms powering up. 2034. The soft occupation begins. Not with troops, but with influence. A wave of sudden social movements that appear overnight. New belief systems with oddly uniform language. Viral compulsions. People doing things that don't feel like them. In this timeline, it's not mass mind control in a cartoonish way. It's nudging, steering, amplifying the worst impulses already present. Ring bearers become both hunted and needed. Some are recruited quietly by institutions. Others disappear from online forums. The conspiracy claims wellness retreats and medical studies become cover stories for containment. 2035. The signal storm. The ringing becomes nearly universal for a brief period, days or weeks, where millions report tones, pressure, and insomnia. This is the invasion trying to brute force synchronization across the population, like forcing every device onto the same network. The result is chaos. Accidents, panic, breakdowns. But it also creates a mass awakening effect because once everyone hears it, the gaslighting collapses. 2036. The Ring Bearer Accord. A decentralized alliance forms with a single message. Don't let them own your attention. The conspiracy story claims the invaders feed on certain states. Fear, despair, rage, because those states make humans predictable, easy to steer, easy to fracture. The countermeasure is not denial. It's discipline. The ring bearers teach basic mental sovereignty. How to interrupt spirals, how to reduce exposure to engineered outrage, how to create local trust. 2037. The false savior phase, tied again to blue beam-style fears. The narrative says a global solution is offered: new tech, new governance, new security agreements, perhaps even a unified response to the sky threat. But the underground claims the solution is a leash, a system that would lock humanity into a controlled frequency ecosystem permanently, making true resistance impossible. The ring bearers warn that the danger isn't only the invaders. It's what desperate humans will accept in response. 2038. The second signal arrives. In the story, this is the real alarm. Not the ringing itself, but a sudden moment when many ring bearers hear a clear shift, like a key change in music, followed by a deep stillness. They interpret it as the invasion fleet crossing a boundary, entering a final approach corridor. The following months bring intensified anomalies, infrastructure stress, and a rising sense that the world is holding its breath. 2039. First contact, but not friendly, not formal. A series of events forces open communication. Interceptions, forced landings, unmistakable presence. Humanity does what it always does, argues about it. But the ring bearers push one consistent claim: whatever these entities are, they don't primarily fight with weapons. They fight with perception. They win by making humans doubt each other, doubt themselves, and doubt reality. 2040, the resistance year. In this narrative, organized defense finally looks less like armies and more like networks. Local resilience, independent communications, community protection, and psychological training. Ring bearers become instructors and anchors. Their constant ringing, once a curse, becomes proof that they can endure exposure without collapsing. They teach others to recognize when thoughts and emotions don't feel self-generated. 2041. The human firewall concept spreads. Instead of relying on centralized systems that can be hijacked, communities build low-tech alternatives. Analog backups, local food, mesh networks, offline education. The timeline claims this is when the invasion begins failing, not because the invaders lack power, but because humans become less controllable. 2042. The Great Reversal. The narrative's hopeful turning point. The ring bearers discover that the very tone used to influence humanity can be inverted. Shifted in phase, counter-harmonized. It doesn't destroy the invaders. It disrupts their interface. In this story, they can't fully occupy a mind that refuses synchronization. They can't steer a population that won't lock into the same fear rhythm. 2043. The Black Silence Incident. A day or week when the ring abruptly ends for many ring bearers. Some celebrate, some panic. The lore says it's the sign the invasion network has been severed in key regions, either by human countermeasures or by the invaders withdrawing to regroup. The sky feels clearer. Dreams become less invasive. People report feeling like they got their inner voice back. 2044. The open world phase begins. With the veil partially lifted, humanity can no longer pretend it's alone. But the timeline warns that openness brings new battles. Information warfare, trust wars, infiltration attempts. The ring bearers, once fringe, become cultural guardians, reminding people that the first battlefield is always attention. 2045. The treaty trap attempt. A final push to formalize control through agreement. The narrative claims the invaders or their human proxies push for compliance frameworks, monitoring implants mandatory systems for safety. Ring bearers oppose it, arguing that any system that can broadcast into the body is a weapon waiting for a hand. 2046. The living signal era. The ringing, for those who still have it, becomes less painful and more informative, like a weather sense. In this story, the alarm transforms into a skill. Some can detect anomalies, deception, and presence. It doesn't make them superhuman. It makes them harder to fool. 2047. The 50-year echo. Exactly a century after the modern UFO era ignited, the timeline circles back. The myth says the invaders planned in cycles. Humans finally understand the rhythm. And once you understand the rhythm, you can break it. From 2048 to 2050, the story ends not with a clean victory, but with a new kind of world, one where humanity grows up. Not because we want to, but because we have to. The invasion becomes a pressure that forces evolution, socially, psychologically, spiritually, and technologically. Ring bearers are no longer a hidden class. They're living reminders that the body can sense truth before institutions admit it. And now we return to the beginning. If you live with constant ringing, the narrative doesn't ask you to panic. It asks you to pay attention. In the story, the ringing is the smoke alarm. But the real question is what you do when you hear it. Do you ignore it until the room fills? Do you let someone else tell you it's just in your head? Or do you treat it like a signal that you can learn from, a warning that demands preparation, mental discipline, community, resilience, and clarity? Because in this timeline, the invasion doesn't start when the first craft appears. It starts when you can no longer tell which thoughts are yours. And the chosen vessels, the ring bearers, aren't chosen to be special. They're chosen to be early. Early enough to warn the rest. Early enough to build something stronger than fear. Early enough to remember that no matter what is approaching, the most valuable territory on Earth is still the same territory it's always been. The space behind your eyes. The quiet place where your attention lives. And if the ringing is real, if it's an alarm, then maybe the most rebellious thing you can do is not scream, not spiral, not collapse into doom, but to get steady, to get ready, to turn the signal into a map, and to make sure that when the sky finally changes, humanity changes with it together.